Hello. This is my very first live stream ever, so thank you for tuning in. I'm going to try to keep it a little bit more brief and educational and hopefully fun. I'm glad you are either joining me or watching this after the live, probably after because I don't have a ton of followers. But I wanted to start doing these weekly, and so you're going to start seeing me a little bit more in a live sense here in TikTok and then hopefully eventually the other platforms as well. But each week I'm going to bring a topic to the live stream and I'm going to talk to you guys about what the topic is, some of the educational side of those things, and then also going to give kind of my opinion on what's going on with whatever the topic is this week. All of it will be real estate related. That's kind of my niche. I'm a realtor and an investor here in Albuquerque. And so absolutely it's going to be real estate focused, but hopefully it'll be a little bit fun as well. I hope everything's working correctly. I can't really tell. Honestly, I have no idea if the audio is working, but I'm going to do this anyway, and if it fails completely for the first one, at least I know what I did wrong for the next ones. So today, I wanted to bring some information around the Rio Rancho Center. City Center is what they're calling it, and the designation that they've just given it, and in terms of being site ready for businesses to develop on. I think this is a really important thing for people to be aware of. Homeowners, home buyers, investors. When a city designates an area, or really the state, I should say, they designate an area that they're deeming appropriate for business. I think residential, the sides of real estate need to be aware of that as well, because I think it changes the way that people perceive the area. It changes the amount of people coming into the area and buying homes and selling homes. It changes the way new builders operate. And so we're going to discuss all of that today, hopefully 30 minutes or so. And if you're watching this after the live, feel free to reach out to me. 802-379-3915 is my cell. And I'm happy to answer any questions you have if this doesn't answer it. So first kind of thing we're going to cover is what all of this really means. So they use some terms in here that I think maybe the layman wouldn't understand because they're not involved in real estate full time. And so we're going to cover that. We're going to cover why this matters to homeowners, or you could classify them as sellers, right? We're also going to cover what it means if you're buying a home in that area. We're gonna cover the investor angle, so talking about what it looks like from an investor's side, and then we're also going to talk about just some realities of what this whole thing is, because it is a designation, but that doesn't necessarily mean that other things don't impact that designation also. So I'm going to jump right into it. So site readiness. So the state of New Mexico, they have flagged 43 acres in the city center as shovel ready. And what they designate that as is groundwork has pretty much been handled in completion. So utilities have been brought in, zoning has been done, access to the actual property is there, there's permitting in place. And so effectively what the value there is that it allows businesses to check a lot of those things off of their boxes when they're coming into an area and developing a new location for whatever the business is. Intel is a big business here in New Mexico. That is, a company that would look at a job site or a potential site for their next location, and they're going to want to understand if there are ways in which they can shortcut the process by having things done already. And so the state has taken the initiative to make these, 43 acres site ready, in the hope that that will entice a business to come utilize that site and put a location there without having to go through all of the extra stuff that if they just found a raw piece of land and kind of had to facilitate that. So all in all, the goal with this site readiness and the reason they designate sites this way, they want to make it easier for businesses to come into an area. And ultimately, we know just from an economic sense, when businesses do come into an area, depending on the business, but most of the time when businesses come into an area, it helps the general economy because people buy more homes and sell more homes and live in the area in which the business is operating, which means they spend money there, etc. So there's also about a 20-acre lot that are primed for mixed use and commercial around those 43 acres. So to me, that tells me that if there's going to be businesses built in the 43 acres, the extra 20 acres around it could impact where home sales are going. If new builders are going into that area to build the homes for the people that are going to work the jobs, et cetera, et cetera. The city is eligible to apply for roughly 1.5 million to extend College Boulevard to Broadmoor. So that's another thing that is a big kind of piece to look at when you have a city, making infrastructure changes. This could definitely impact how you view an area and how prices change, et cetera, et cetera. It kind of gives us a heads up to what they believe the future of that area is, which may impact your investment side, right? The other thing that I think is important here, there were only 5 sites statewide that are designated shovel ready. And now that the city or the state has done this with Rio Rancho City Center, that is on that list. I think that's an important topic to note, because when a company from out of state looks at New Mexico and says, maybe we want a location here, they are looking for those site ready places first, and then they're facilitating after that. And so being on this list absolutely changes the perception of what a business does when they analyze and make assessments for moving into the area. So all in all, I think from that side of it, knowing Rio Rancho's growth and where it's headed, that them being on this list is a very positive thing, because it gives them a lot more eyeballs into Rio Rancho City Center, as opposed to them taking their attention to other places in New Mexico that are already site ready, essentially. So all that is just a way for the state, site readiness is a way for the state to essentially say, hey, we are getting this ready for businesses, please come in, please make this work. So yeah, so does it actually mean anything? I do think it has value in the sense that businesses can, look at what's happening in the site readiness, and they can see that the site is ready to be built. Does it have value all the time? I don't necessarily think so. And here's the reasoning why. I think that in some cases, businesses are also looking at what is the legislative and red tape that they have to jump through even after the buildings are done. What does the state look like in order to run and operate the business here? And so that, I think, is one of those things that as New Mexico as a whole we may need to kind of address a little bit. But I do think it gives it designation that it's site ready or shovel ready. I think it's a positive, but it doesn't just take away all of the different red tape that New Mexico has for businesses anyway. So there is that layer that any savvy business is going to look at it from that perspective as well. So just keep it in mind. That's just my take personally. So question mark here of why does it matter to home owners, which we could call home sellers, right? There are a few variables that I think home owners in Rio Rancho need to be aware of when they own in general. And one of them is that jobs are the #1 demand driver for purchases and sales in any state. So when you have a situation where a job or many jobs come into an area that are going to provide more labor, naturally you have places that people are going to need to live. And that is where, as a homeowner, your values are probably going to go up as more people and more business comes into the area that you're in. Now, depending on how you look at that, that could be good versus you're also putting more people in that area, more traffic, more things like that. So yes, home value will go up, but other things about the area will also change. The other thing with that is that Intel, Netflix, those big companies that are already here are pulling into Rio Rancho. So given the fact that there are some examples of big companies already in place, I do believe that that's a good reason to make the argument that big companies will look at Rio Rancho City Center pretty seriously. I think it gives them an opportunity. And given the fact that the acreage is so much, 43 acres is a lot of land. And so you may see 1, 2, or 3 big companies come in and converge on that space to get a feel for whatever else they're doing in their specific company, right? I think the city center, on top of the other businesses that are there, just adds like an engine that essentially attracts more and more and more people. And who knows, you may see that the city starts to do this in other parts of Rio Rancho. We really only have that way to expand when you look at Albuquerque and Rio Rancho. Westward is really where most of that expansion is headed because we're blocked on the other 3 sides. And so I do believe that being that they've just designated the city center as site ready, I do think combined with Netflix and Intel and those other big companies there, that is going to draw some other larger companies that are interested in something similar. So the other thing with more competition for homes, it's going to drive prices up. So if you're an owner of a house right now, I can't say for certain that home prices are going to go up based on this. But the reality becomes is that more buyers are in the area and more development will be done in that area. The biggest thing I'd say to this with the home values is that it is definitely dependent on your home specifically. I can sit here all day and tell you that Rio Rancho is going to appreciate in home value, but depending on the area in Rio Rancho you're in, that might not be true. And depending on your home particularly, that might not be true. So the biggest thing I'd say is if you're looking at a value on Zillow or Realtor.com or anywhere else, those systems are more of a vague overview of what your home is. They don't get inside your home and look at the condition. They don't get anywhere near your house. They just do it, through an algorithm. And so you probably need to consult with somebody, whether that's a realtor or somebody around values, just so you can get a more detailed look besides just going to Zillow. And then when you look at the appreciation side, we can't speak for appreciation particularly, but if you're looking at the value of your home based on what's coming down the road from the state and these businesses, that could impact, what you see as value, and it might impact how you sell. If you see that, hey, this city center is getting built and you believe as a consumer that it's going to bring value over the term, well, maybe you want to wait 2 years to sell because you want to see that develop and see if there's more value there. The other reality, though, is that if you need to sell your house, you need to sell your house. So you can't always just wait. But those are things to keep in mind as a homeowner in regards to this moving or this designation with the city center. So, I think I kind of just gave my opinion on this. Consult somebody that you trust to give you an accurate assessment of your values. So if you're buying, this definitely impacts you also. Obviously, with the sales side, if you already own the home, it's a great thing to kind of have in place because you're gonna rise with the tides a little bit from a value side. If you're buying, this does change a little bit of your perspective on what's happening inside of the buying market, right? In my opinion, when you see jobs or businesses move into areas that they were not previously in, it's usually a good indication that there's going to be a little bit more. People moving into that area, which could cause a little bit of a higher buyer demand, which could raise prices, right? So all of this to say from the buying side is that there may be a decision you have to make now as opposed to waiting. If you were waiting to buy a home in Rio Rancho, these may be variables that you want to consider about buying sooner so you can kind of catch some of that wave, right? Again, we can't say for certain if that comes in a year versus 10 years, right? I've been in New Mexico about a decade now, and things that I thought would get done, in a couple of years have been really delayed versus things that I thought would take 10 years have been quick, right? So you can't really speak for it in the development, but that is something to consider. The other big variable on the buying side with Rio Rancho, I want to make it very clear. I'm not saying go buy a house in Rio Rancho right this second, right? You still want to be very, very smart from the investment space where you don't want to allow yourself to get into the hopium, we call it. And what hopium is, I have this awesome property I want to buy, and I think it's going to be a good investment, and my hope is that it appreciates and the rents go up so that it'll be good numbers wise. Don't buy a property like that. If you're an investor or if you want to get into investing, you need to have an ability to filter out some of the noise that is the hope that an area is going to be great. But right now, if you're buying a property in Rio Rancho, you want to make sure you still buy a smart property that's near the appraisal value or under, and we'll talk about investing in a little bit. But the one thing I would say with this inside of the buyer market is if we see a big flood of buyers come into the market, demand will scale with that, which means inventory will shorten with that. I do think that combined with the new construction side, which I'm going to go over, buyers are in this market do have a little bit more leg room to negotiate repairs and get the things that they're needing out of a resale home versus a new construction. Rates are still in the mid-6 right now, so buying in Rio Rancho hasn't changed in the last year or so, really. It's really dependent on what your situation is. And again, like I said, you're buying a property smart the first time, so you don't have to hold it to make it a good investment, if that makes sense. And then new construction versus resale. This is something to really consider when you look at moving into an area where development is still occurring, right? In Rio Rancho, you see it. Areas that were built, 10 or 20 years ago that used to be on the very edge of Rio Rancho are now in the dead center of it, right? And so as we continue to expand there, The hard part with homeowners is if you go and buy a new construction property, you're going to run into the variable that you're competing with the builders down the road. So if I buy a property, let's say I bought one in 2025, and my next door neighborhood right near me is still constructing properties, well, whatever my value was at when I purchased it, it's going to be very similar to the new builds. But when a buyer comes and looks at my home versus what the new builds are offering, typically they're going to look at new builds first because one, it's brand new, nobody's lived in it. But two, they also are offering a bunch of incentives. And sometimes the pricing on the new home is better than going to buy the resale that's only 2 years old. And the hard part with an owner in that sense is that if you've owned the home and you got to move in 2 years, you might not have made that spread back in order to be able to actually facilitate what you need equity-wise to get out of that deal. So you do want to consider that. Buying in Rio Rancho is not just a green money bag. It's not just buy somewhere and hope that it's going to go up. There's pockets and there's places in Rio that make a lot of sense right now, but I believe there are also a lot of places that don't make sense for a resale. And again, it's also based on your particular situation. If you feel like you're going to be in the home for 10 years, you probably have a good case to make that you'll be fine. But if you buy a house and sell it a year later and there's new construction right next door, you're going to run into some of those issues that homeowners are seeing right now. So keep it in mind as you decide around new construction versus buying a resale property in Rio. So should you buy near city center now? I can't make that decision for you. My personal belief on this is that I am still investing in Rio Rancho. I'm still investing near city center. I do believe that it's a great place to invest in this current ecosystem, I guess you could say. My beliefs, and I'll probably do another live stream on this, I'm a long-term investor. So the reality there is that from that perspective, I benefit from long-term thinking and not trying to just go get a return in a year and sell it, right? Could you flip homes in Rio Rancho right now? Absolutely, but it's going to be in some of those older areas. Flipping inside of that new construction is obviously doesn't make any sense. But in my opinion, I think the answer to this question, should you buy in city center now, you should buy when you're ready to buy a home and when it fits for your particular situation, and or when you've done enough research and feel confident enough to buy an investment property. But I can't say should you go buy there or should you not buy there. I think it's valuable. I'm doing it personally, but for you, your situation may be totally different. And I want to be very clear on that too. So the investor angle. So this I kind of mentioned as well, but we talked about it on the seller side. Job growth or employment growth is one of the major signs of investments moving in a net positive direction. When you see job growth or employer growth in an area, typically you see rental growth in that area as well, and obviously accelerated sales price appreciation in that area. So as an investor, if your game is to buy long-term rentals like mine, I think that the reality of Rio Rancho becomes that you are still growing. And when you go to, let's say, Albuquerque proper or wherever else, those areas aren't necessarily still growing and expanding. And so you do have that lack of business piece. And so I think this is a positive indicator for Rio Rancho and rental demand down the road. What I think Rio Rancho could benefit from is more multi-units. I think Albuquerque does an amazing job. They have a ton of multi-units that were built, a long time ago. But I do think Rio Rancho could benefit from some rental properties in that capacity. So those don't appreciate the same as single-family homes, but that's something to consider. Biggest thing I'd say here is you're using the jobs as your underwriting, not vibes I put here, but I don't want you to fall into the hopium. I'm not trying to convey that Rio Rancho is blowing up. That's not what this message is. It's a reality of what's happening and what could happen based on the decisions they make. So don't buy a property on vibes. Buy it on the sense that it's a good property when you purchase it, numbers-wise, condition-wise, etc. Rio Rancho's entry points as well, and this means for more for investors and business. I believe they are a little bit more friendly than in other Western metros, your Californias, things like that. So that's something to consider from an investment standpoint. I think management is a little bit easier in New Mexico as opposed to other places. Not every place. Texas, is a lot different, but it's not as challenging here as it would be in other areas to manage, an investment. And then I think cash flow is realistic. You're seeing a little bit of change with the cash flow on the investments. And the reason is because interest rates went up. And so when an interest rate goes up in a market and an investor is getting a spread on their interest, when it goes from 2% to 6%, the investor just wiped out possibly their spread. So I do see that coming back a little bit. It's going to be dependent on values if those cool a little bit more also. But the last thing I said here on my slides was just if you're using a buy box and you have a focus on what you're investing in, it's very easy to filter out a lot of the noise that is this live stream or social media or whatever else. I did write an article on my website about what a buy box is, but in short, all it is a way for you to very clearly focus on the investment type that you want. So for instance, when I say I'm an investor, I don't typically just say I invest in real estate, right? When somebody asks me what I invest in, my buy box would be a checklist of the things that I want when I purchase a property. For instance, here's an example. My buy box is multi-units. So I want to buy anything from 2 to 4 units, small apartment complexes, not a major big one. I want to buy something that was built in the 1950s, 60s, 70s and needs a good renovation so that I can improve it and get some equity with it and then also possibly raise the rents depending on the area. I want it to be in specific areas of the city. I don't want to be in specific areas, and so I want to get very, very granular on where I want it to be. I want it to be between a certain price range. So in my case, let's just say 200,000 to 400,000, right? And you just get as detailed as you very possibly can with your buy box because it allows you to hyper focus on the investments and all of the market noise becomes a little bit less. So if you have questions on what that looks like or if you want to develop your buy box, please reach out to me. I'd be happy to sit down with you and talk about the investment space so you have a clearer picture on what it looks like to buy a true investment property. Where would I put my money around here and where would I not? This is a good question. I think that a lot of people are wanting to invest and wanting to do some real estate stuff, but maybe they feel like there's a significant risk, which there is. Any investment has risk. But where would I put my money around here? For me personally, I'm younger. I'm only 27, and so I look at my investment span over this next 50 years of my life. So personally for me, I'm spending time now and money now investing in long-term hold real estate, which is buying rental properties, renovating them, putting a tenant in there and holding and owning the piece of property and managing it long-term. And that for me works because I have a long runway, right? I'm not worried about going and getting a ton of cash flow right now because I know that I'm going to own the property for quite a while. And that's the risk I'm willing to take and hope that I don't need to sell it and panic and get out essentially at some point. So for your answer, that's where we're going to have to detail your situation a little bit more. We have to understand what your timelines look like, what your figures look like, what your buy box look like. So personally, I love the idea of long-term investments. That's just the way I think and the way I operate. And so I'm putting my money into long-term rentals. And obviously some of the money market things, stuff like that. Where I would not right now, it has become a little more challenging to flip properties in this current market. Unless you go get a crazy good deal, or maybe you have access to some financing that's not where the market rates are at, if they're under the market rates. The way that prices have risen and the way that sellers are selling, meaning they are a little bit more resistant to doing repairs, et cetera, that type of thing, you're seeing the margins on a flip really scale down, and it's a lot harder to find a good property to do it with and then do all the work and still have margin on the other side with how much the money is costing you for interest. So I don't personally do any flips right now. I have done flips before, but I'm not interested in a flip market right now personally. But again, it's dependent on your situation and your access as well. So honest caveat, I think this is an important last piece, and I'm gonna finalize it here. The caveat with all of this, with Rio Rancho City Center and the site readiness plan, it's a designation of a site, but it does not detail which companies are coming in, if any companies are coming in. It does not detail the things that are actually going to move the dial with this site. And so that's one big thing I want to make clear is like I'm stating that this is happening and they've designated it. It's more of a piece of note, less of a piece of I'm going to go buy Rio Rancho because it's going to blow up in 2 years. It could, right? But I want to make it clear that there's a lot of red tape people have to move through in order to actually build on this site, even after it's deemed site ready or shovel ready. it still needs employers to commit to infrastructure. That's one piece there. This is a signal, not a guarantee. Obviously, you know that. But it does signal that they're moving. And I think that's an important piece that we sometimes miss in New Mexico and or don't see often, is that the state moves very slowly, and like every state does. But the piece that they've made and the designation that they've made, to me, tells me that they're at least considering what this next level is. And I find that to be a positive for Rio Rancho as a whole. And my job is to read the signals with clear eyes and not, sell you guys a dream. So that's exactly what I'm not doing here. I'm not telling you to go buy in Rio Rancho this minute. But what I am telling you is that there could be opportunity for positive real estate interactions in Rio Rancho if this develops the same way that it has been in that sense. So all in all, I think that's where I'm going to end my first live stream. This was a little weird for me. I've never done something like this, and I'm going to have to learn how to look at everybody in the chat and stuff. But if you have questions about real estate, about buying, selling, investing, whatever you need, I'm happy to help and sit down with you and take a phone call. My number again is 802-379-3915. If you want to call me or DM me on TikTok or any Instagram or whatever, I'm happy to chat. I also, like I said before, have a blog on my website, livingeasy.kw.com. So if you want to read more about these topics and other topics that I put out on my page, feel free to check that out. But thank you if you saw this live stream. I appreciate you tuning in for a little bit. And if you're watching this video afterwards, I hope I answered some questions.